Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. And first of all, I want to very shortly to recognize the importance of this very meeting and congratulate to you, to all organizers from the University of Liège and also from the ICOMOS TheoPhilos committee. I do believe it's really a very valid and timely meeting. And I try to be as short as possible in my presentation. I am going to focus on some really real challenges. So please, yes, change the slide, and the next slide is about this. One of the, as far as I understand, the biggest challenge. What is the situation? What is the connection and differences among monuments and sites and cultural heritage? You can see on the picture, I think it's quite clear that that's not exactly the same one. I want to go further. Please, next slide. This is a short, how to say, a presentation about the similarities and differences among historic monuments and heritage properties. And the selection and classification is totally different, because as for the historic monuments, it's only possible on national level, and it's based on scientific evaluation, and it means also goes together with a legal protection. As for the properties, it's possible on several levels, not only the state level or national level, and based on recognition of communities, by the communities. It's not a scientific selection. It's a recognition by the committees. And protection is not necessarily there as a legal protection. Next slide, please. So it's even more clear from this very picture that historic monuments are possible to recognize at national level, and is also necessary to be recognized as a World Heritage or something like this. As for the heritage property, wide series of different levels, starting with family, persons, family, communities, territorial, regional units, nations, region, and finally the World Heritage. You can understand this is somehow like an onion. There are different levels of recognition and the how to say, selection of heritage properties. With that, I don't want to tell you, but I want to tell that there are not also very much important. I want to point it at only the differentiation among historic monuments and heritage properties. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges that when we are composing or not really clear on how we are using the terms. And historic monuments are always immovable site-based properties, or immovable by destination, like some elements in churches or historic buildings. And as for the heritage properties, it's possible to be immovable and also movable items, even intangible heritage-related items. So it's not exactly the same set of the heritage items. Next, please. The first and biggest challenge is the identification of monuments and sites as the original concepts defined by the scope of ICOMOS with built heritage does not recognize a quantitative, but above all, a qualitative difference that cannot be effectively addressed either in principle or in practice. Next, please. So I want to show you with a comparison from biology or the living part of the world. So we have to use this comparison, it must be clearly seen that all monuments and sites are heritage properties, but not all heritage properties are historic monuments. So the two set is interconnected, but the monuments are much, much less in quantity, and this is the top of the values. Next, please. So again, all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. This is very similar, and we should never have to make a confusion. Otherwise, we are facing us with big challenges. Next, please. So, what about the second challenge? Because this was the first one, to have a clear understanding on monuments and sites and other heritage properties. So, and the second one is very much connected with also with quantity, the clear understanding that principles and practices which are mandatory to be applicable to monuments cannot be imposed all heritage elements and properties. Next, please. So, because it would create a completely unrealistic situation, socially, economically, and in terms of value protection, and would be an unnecessary burden. In general, the conservation of an item of cultural heritage does not necessarily have to be the same as the conservation of a scheduled or protected historic monuments. On the one hand, it is impossible to fulfill all the professional requirements in the case of all the set of the cultural heritage items, whose requirements are mandatory for the conservation of monuments. This results is almost the total freezing of life. On the other hand, if scheduled monuments are treated as a simple cultural heritage property, it results in catastrophic losses of value. Flexibility allowed for common heritage elements are only acceptable in rare and exclusively exceptional cases in connection with scheduled or protected monuments. Next, please. The third challenge is, yesterday we have heard quite a number of very interesting and meaningful presentations, and many times was mentioned the intangible component. So I want to be very clear in this one. The intellectual slippage that has that theoretical approach to overemphasize the importance of non-material dimension. It is natural that all monuments and all non-monumental built heritage elements, of course, have non-material dimension, and that is very important. But it is not equal to intangible heritage. You can see on the picture a phantom from the Czechia, which was very much important in the how to say, shaping the city of Telch. It is somehow material, but it is an immaterial basement or basis of this very beautiful and important historic city. That is not an intangible heritage. This is something which is an attribute of intangible dimension of the tangible heritage. Next, please. So yesterday we also have heard quite a number of NARA convention. I was lucky to be a part of this meeting in 1999, and it was very clear the outcome of this document and this event that does not at all force a global generalization. And we have to recognize that each major cultural agglomeration defines its own norms of authenticity and integrity, and of course, it only valid for the given region. It's a big mistake when, for example, we in Europe are starting to use the authenticity understanding of Asian or Japanese manner. Next, please. Of course, when we are speaking about the regional approach, subsidiarity is really, and professionalism is always important. So even a regional or local approach following the principle of subsidiarity cannot be unprofessional. In other words, I want to tell you that like just in medicine, on the health territory of the life, dealing with heritage, and similarly with heritage values, it is not the majority vote which has to be important, and certainly not short-term interest that should decide, but broad knowledge on the given level of values and conscientious implementation. I am very, how to say, in favor of the bottom-up approach, but it never had to be confused with that just majority vote have to decide on very important decisions in connection with heritage values. Next, please. So this is the fourth challenge to be faced. It is precisely because of this short-term, interest-driven approach, namely the refacing of existing monuments, and similarly, in a sense, other elements of the built heritage, in a way that amounts of their falsification, facadism, love construction, and other how to say, sorry for the expression, abusement in heritage values, it's really a very big danger. And the widespread and overconfident use of IT, information and technology, leads to the destruction of many original assets, or their replacement by some invented or spectacular reconstructions. This is perhaps the area where the need for clear, unambiguous guidelines in the greatest and most urgent. So we have to really to save the monuments and sites also in connection with the new approaches of artificial intelligence and use of informational technology. Next, please. So maybe I was too fast, but I just approaching to my concluding remarks. And as how to say, quite old ICOMOS member and a professional, I do believe that it's not by chance that ICOMOS in its name has the expression monuments and sites. And I do believe it is still valid to recognize the specificity at the outstanding value of monuments and sites, and not confusing them with other elements of also important but different elements of cultural heritage. As monuments and sites as most significant assets, which must be kept in full recognition of the authenticity and integrity. We have heard quite a lot about the use and reuse and adaptive reuse of built heritage or cultural heritage elements. When we are looking for monuments and sites, we have to be very careful to make decisions. It's always only in the Venice Charter is mentioned that the real and sustainable function is important, but it's never had to be used as something which is just diminishing the existing value. So monuments and sites have to be recognized as authentic attributes of diversity and examples of human creativity and continuity. So it is not only important something for persons, families, local communities, but it's something more. And therefore, it has to be seen a different and special way. And also monuments and sites as bearers or treasures of most important and irrepressible documentative capacity of history, arts, and society also have to be recognized. And I want to underline this statement because I do believe when we are just enthusiastically using new technologies and changing the existing physical attributes of historic monuments, we are just ruining the traces of the former and creativity, and we are no more able to see the real traces of the tools used by the artists that time, and so on and so on. And finally, if we are dealing with monuments and sites as meaningful laboratories for all other kind of cultural heritage properties, which are different but also important. I always highlight this, that all cultural heritage properties are important. But if we are using monument and sites in their own specificity, it could be a very good laboratory for many other cases. Next, please. And this is only the very last slide of my presentation. I really hope that I could raise your attention to those 4 challenges, and to help also to ICOMOS and the larger scale of experts and many other stakeholders in the cultural heritage landscape, that we have to be really not only enthusiastic to recognize the larger and larger amount of heritage, and even at the very end of the day, everything became heritage, but we have to really be careful to pay attention to the monuments and sites. Of course, not forget the other heritage properties. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. Next time you have to come in person with that beautiful cake, I think. So please hold your questions for the end of the session. And the questions will be asked at the end of the session. So we'll first hear the other presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So my name is Jinze, and I'm a heritage researcher at KU Leuven, Belgium, that we have beautifully visited the day before yesterday, and thank you for having me here again. Today I would like to return to the question Nigel raised yesterday about those cultural and philosophical foundations that no one dares to touch, and use that lens to explore some of the impacts that ICOMOS has had within the Chinese architectural context. And more concretely, I focus on the site of the Tang Dynasty Daming Palace in Xi'an, and I focus on how its conservation display scheme embodies a kind of juxtaposition of different imaginaries of modernity. First, I would like to quote a remark by the British art historian and classicist Yas Elsner, and his words, I think, neatly capture the core of my approach. He said, the ancient monument's very being and treatment by modernity is the result of the ancestral political demands of contemporary ideologies and values. Nothing is neutral about the cultivation or the preservation of ancient monuments. One of China's most famous ancient capitals and now a major cultural tourism destination. It served as the capital of at least 13 dynasties, including some of the most powerful ones in Chinese history. Yet today, almost none of these early and middle imperial period great palaces, temples, city walls, and gates have survived. We mainly see today there are low, unimpressive mounds of rammed earth. In other words, sites with very little visual appeal, but immense historical significance. The site of Daming Palace, or the Palace of Great Brightness, is a key example of this tension between modern visual expectations and the site's muted historical depth. Covering around 3.2 square kilometers, it was the political center of a flourishing Tang Empire from the 7th century until it was burnt down in the year of 896. Designated as a National Heritage Site in 1961, the first batch, and inscribed on the World Heritage List since 2014, it was reshaped after 2008 through an urban renewal and an international design competition in which some of our colleagues were also took part. The selected master plan was implemented between 2009 and 2012. And now we're going to zoom out. So for the moment, I would like to step away from the Daming Palace and look more closely at some of the cultural and philosophical foundations of architecture in Europe and in China, namely architectural temporality, sensibility, and historicity. To do this, I begin with a very simple equation, the so-called invention of the historic monument. Buildings into heritage means that people start to project extra values onto buildings, through a particular gaze, okay? And in her book, The Invention of the Historical Monument, the French historian Françoise Choy describes how this gaze first appeared around 1430 in Italy as a new pair of sensibilities, a sense of historical distance. We are different from the past. A sense of historical distance and a new aesthetic interest in the form of antiquity. So these twin sensibilities of history and of art are the precondition for the very idea of the historic monument and for the later European debates that eventually led to the 1964 the Venice Charter, as we have seen also in the previous presentation. Historic monument is really one of the core concepts. However, in the Chinese tradition, there is no clear concept equivalent to the historic monument. On the one hand, China has a very rich historiographical culture and a deep sense of history. People are acutely aware of the passing of time, okay? As Confucius always say, time passes like the passing by of a river, okay? So on the other hand, this experience is not primarily based on a sharp feeling of distance from the past. It is more about seeing oneself as part of an unbroken historical current and feeling empathy with those who came before. So here in this painting, instead of evoking this Venice Charter's idea of modern stamp, aiming to draw a clear line between the past and present, the Chinese stamps, as you can see here, left by countless collectors of the past, actually construct a spiritual dialogue with both ancient connoisseurs and future admirers. So it's actually a symbol of connection between the past and the future and today. It's not like, you know, cutting off with the past. And the other pillar for sensibility and historicity, never pronounce that. From the 11th century onward, epigraphic studies and the collecting of bronzes and stone inscriptions created a highly refined eye for the external form of antiquity, of course. But yet, however, this sensibility was not extended to buildings. One key reason is that construction never entered the literati's daily artistic practice. Elite taste in architecture was usually framed through poetic and pictorial associations, while their real involvement in building focused on spatial order and the relationship between buildings and landscape. So the historicity of architecture worked in a similar way. For instance, the repeated reimagining of the orchid pavilion is a long revivalist practice in garden and architecture design, reperforming the famous calligrapher Wang Xizhi's manuscript by translating the setting of his famous mid-4th century scholarly gathering with bamboo reliefs and curved river course. As you can see here, the historicity of the Xishang pavilion in the Forbidden City is visualized by spatial form and decorative design. As the famous American sinologist Frederick Mote says that the real past in China is the past of the mind. The imperishable elements are moments of human experience, not on material. On the ground of sensibility and historicity, we need to look at the European fascination with ruins. We're going back to Europe. Masonry buildings can leave stable and visible remains for centuries, even millennia. When framed by vegetation, they become like visually stunning monuments. During the Enlightenment, travelers on the Grand Tour projected their modern ideals of reason and universal values onto the classical ruins they visited, using imagined antiquity to criticize contemporary institutions and customs. This produced a distinctive artistic taste. Painters such as Giovanni Paolo Panini created images that dramatically stitched together Roman ruins that never actually stood side by side. In royal gardens, fake ruins were built. Art historian Alois Riegel later described this cult of ruins as a Baroque enjoyment of the contrast between ancient greatness and present decay, of melancholy and a wish to preserve. John Ruskin then defined the concept of picturesque as a kind of parasitical sublimity, suit in ruins, where cracks, stains, and plants make architecture resemble the work of nature, suggesting that picturesque ruins stage the subordination of human making to the higher order of a divine creation. Meanwhile, in China, traditional architecture was built primarily of timber and earth rather than stone. This means it simply cannot produce European-style ruins. Correspondingly, there is no aesthetic of ruins in traditional Chinese sensibilities. Instead, there is a long-standing habit of repeatedly rebuilding important structures in order to keep the past alive in visible form, as in the case of the Orchid Pavilion that we have seen in the Forbidden City earlier. So the absence of a ruin aesthetic does not mean that Chinese nostalgia lacks a modernist inner logic. In the 11th century, the literatus Ouyangxiu stressed that sense of eternity he felt when he collected ancient objects did not come from their material survival, but from the enduring moral qualities they embodied. So all tangible things, he said, will vanish, but human spirit and virtue can be handed down. So this human-centered value rationality, which places people above object, is clearly in contrast to John Ruskin's theory of architectural art. The first modern architectural heritization in China began in the 1930s. Architects such as Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin, both trained in the US, helped to invent a way of looking at ancient buildings as objects of history and of art. So their work was deeply colored by a strong nationalist agenda. In their era, Western scholars had largely treated Chinese architecture with prejudice. James Ferguson, for example, saw the Chinese architectural tradition together with Japanese or the East Asian Chinese architectural tradition as marginal to the supposedly universal Western-led history of architecture. You can see he plays it here. Liang and Lin devoted their lives to showing that Chinese architecture is both historical and artistic by developing a historiography based on the Western notion of formal and stylistic evolution. So this became a basic foundation for China's later architectural gaze. In 1982, Bernard Felden, the then director of ICROM, gave a training course in Beijing co-organized by China's State Administration of Cultural Heritage and Tsinghua University. In 1985, China joined the World Heritage Convention, formally accepting the international authorized heritage discourse. In 1986, the journal is a Chinese journal called World Architecture, published the first full Chinese translation of the Venice Charter, prepared by Professor Chen at Tsinghua University. So this took place in the early years of the reform and opening, when China was eager to learn from abroad, expand its economy, and re-enter the international stage. In this context, the Venice Charter quickly became a convenient handbook for alignment with international standards, and its underlying spirit was largely endorsed from the top down. And by the time the Daming Palace Archaeological Park was planned and built, the influence of ICOMOS and authorized heritage discourse in China was already obvious. The World Heritage nomination of the Silk Roads, which includes the Daming Palace site, had started as early as 2006. It was also among the first national archaeological parks promoted by the state, so the site became a testing ground for different imported ideas. The Australian firm IAPA, which led the implementation, was confronted with a sequence of historically important, with virtually no above-ground remains on the one hand, and on the other, intense social expectations and a legal framework that largely forbids reconstruction. In the end, what emerged there was a kind of postmodernist hodgepodge of above-ground presentations, including interpretive panels, low walls and platforms formed by rammed earth brick or planting, ground drawings of imagined facades, smaller scale models, contemporary thematic sculptures, as well as quasi-reconstructions and even purpose-built picturesque ruins. In the master plan, particular attention was given to the former palace walls and gates because they indicate the basic layout and scale of the palace. The Gate of Red Phoenix, or the Danfengmen, was a symbolic entrance to the park facing the main railway station of Xi'an. The rammed earth foundations of the gate were excavated and kept inside a large metal shelter. Above this, the designers created a full-scale outline of how the original timber structure might have looked like. According to an interview that I conducted at the National Heritage Administration, this project was officially approved as a protective cover and thus classified as a conservation measure rather than a reconstruction. As a gesture towards the Venice Charter's idea of contemporary stamp, the national administration also required the modern materials used here and also a unified muted color, as you can see here. So this is a kind of a wink to the contemporary stamp from the Venice Charter. This structure has become an early example of a new trend in China, combining materially authentic remains underground together with a visually satisfying quasi-reconstructed volume above. Another key experiment is the presentation of the site of the Chen Hall, the central chamber in the backcourt of the Daming Palace. The IAPA invited the artist Feng Feng from the Guangzhou Academy of Fine Arts to create a large installation on top of the hall's foundation titled Palace of Time, which consists of broken concrete columns among newly planted trees and metal brackets loosely derived from Liang Sicheng's drawings of Tang Dynasty timber structures. This postmodernist monster is one of the most extreme hybrids. It mixes the authorized heritage discourse against reconstruction, the perceived spirit of the Venice Charter, such as authenticity, contemporary stamp, etc., a European taste for picturesque ruins, the visual weakness of Chinese earthen archaeological sites, Liang Sicheng's stylistic historicity, and a very strong public desire to see nostalgia. What emerges is a forced juxtaposition of incompatible modernities and narratives, a universalist, anti-reconstruction World Heritage discourse on the one hand, and a nationalist, emotionally charged longing for visibly history on the other. A European picturesque ruins sensibility implies sublimity on the one hand, and a rational and humanistic aesthetic of Confucian ethos on the other. What is apparent is that the post-Second World War Western-led attempt to unify international heritage code of conduct with self-assessed universalities has caused a kind of cultural aphasia on indigenous cultural expressions. Or, in a worst-case scenario, it has caused a plastic surgery on a major non-Western civilization, faking a Western look by distancing herself from her own ancestral identity. Whose nostalgia is this metallic mock ruin built upon? Is this the inculturation of globalized European experiences in Chinese architectural tradition, or the cultural appropriation of European aesthetics by the struggling Chinese modern sensibilities? I hope my provocation could generate some deepened thoughts among us, and thank you. That's for today.
Good morning, everyone. And today I'm honored to present our reflections on the reconstruction of architectural heritage in China, just as Jinze introduced earlier. This topic is about the tension between tradition and modernity and how cultural identity is being reshaped in this process. And my name is Chen. It's a little difficult to pronounce, but it means the sunshine in the morning. So it's easy to remember. And I'm a professor from Suzhou University and the China-Portugal Joint Laboratory of Cultural Heritage Conservation. And as a heritage theorist, Yuka Yuclet highlighted, reconstruction is not a new concept. And actually in traditional society, rituals and symbolic replacement helped preserve a secret site meaning, and even after physical loss. But modernity introduced the new tensions between the craft and the technology, and between local values and the global ambitions. So today we understand reconstruction as a critical process. It demands a deep analysis of a ruin's unique meanings, including its social and cultural value, political symbolism, or historic function. No longer just about rebuilding walls or buildings. It's about managing a dynamic system that requires long-term planning, stakeholders' cooperation, and building the right skills to respond to both risks and opportunities. And so how do I apply the dynamic process in practice? Well, it really depends on the heritage site in question. Important distinction is between rebuilding a standalone monument or working within a living historic city or neighborhood. For a monument, we focus on the material authenticity and the form. But for a living area, the priority shifts to reviving social and cultural life. So it's a difference between preserving an object and revitalizing an organism. So to put it all together, we see the reconstruction not as a one-off event, but as a continuous dynamic cycle. This cycle systematically moved through three key stages. And the first is the inception, which is all about the deep assessment of the site. Then it's the intervention. And this is where the technique restoration happens, but it's guided by an understanding of the social and economic function of the area. And finally, it's the management. It's the crucial ongoing stage that ensures the long-term sustainability. When we link these stages together, they form a powerful loop. It's a process that uses past experience to fuel future prevention and adaptation, creating a truly resilient system. And so when we come back to China, how did China's modern conservation framework develop? It didn't happen in isolation. In the late 20th century, Western idea, especially from the documents like the Venice Charter, really started to influence China. So the concepts like the material authenticity, minimal intervention, and making new additions recognizable were quite different from China's old traditions, which often embarrassed the renewal and the symbolic rebuilding. All of this were happening at the same time as rapid urbanization, the rise of World Heritage influence, and the growing heritage tourism. And increasingly, especially in urban renewal projects, social and economic value started to take property over purely conservation-based concerns. So the cases we will look at, like Hu Xueyan's residence, Changmen Gate, and the Keyuan Garden, all reflect this complex and evolving background. So I should start from Chinese philosophy, just as Jinze did. The conservation and the reconstruction theory of China is deeply connected to China's philosophy tradition. And we draw inspiration from a poem by Tang Dynasty poet Si Kong Tu, and which beautifully captures the spirit of reconstruction. And he writes that, I hear the old refrain of spring's internal story, that was old and is young again. This line suggests that by engaging deeply with the past, we can uncover its living essence, allowing what is ancient to feel vibrant and new again. It's why the yellow Koran, you can see the picture, tower has been continually reconstructed throughout our history. And each time, each dynasty with a different appearance and different styles. So the reconstruction of Hu Xueyan's residence actually sparkled China's first major debate about the Venice Charter. So on the left, you can see the original floor plan from 1920s, and later a modern 5-story residential building were constructed on the on part of the sides of this residence. But after reconstruction, we can see the area view that the result of the reconstruction reshaped the urban fabric totally. So this case focused the conservationists to confront a fundamental question: how should we apply international principle like the Venice Charter in Chinese context? And what balance should we strike between preserving historical truths and enabling the contemporary development? So if we compare the 1920s survey of the Zhiyuan Garden in Hu Xueyan's residence, and with its archaeological plan, and before reconstruction, you can see the garden has completely vanished, just left the ruins. So should they preserve the ruins as often done in the West, like the case from England, or rebuild the garden entirely, like we always often done in China? So that's a very important question. Newspaper at that time involved in this debate, and their discussion mainly revolved around the 4 key questions. Question firstly, was the Venice Charter a mandatory international regulation? The answer was clear, no. It was a set of guidelines, not a legally binding treaty. So this understanding gave Chinese professionals more flexibility in how to apply it. And then second, was the charter fundamentally Eurocentric? Because many argue that these principles were shaped by the context of European stone monuments and didn't fully align with East Asia's philosophy or building tradition. And third, should following the, oh, sorry. Sorry. The third one, the third question is, could following the charter simply means the leaving empty ruins? This was a concern that the principle of recognizability might lead to cultural unsatisfying results, clashing with the Chinese emphasis on continuity rather than frozen preservation. And the question, and finally, could one single project really challenge established doctrine? So, at that time, a lot of newspapers published the debates, and talking about how we should use Venice Charter. So how did the debate end? Well, Hu Xuanyan's residence was fully reconstructed. In fact, it was even listed as a national heritage in 2006. So you can see that this official recognition was important. It's basically validated the reconstruction approach. But if you look closely, you can see traces of the debate. So, for example, in the most controversial part, the Zhiyuan Garden, they strategically use the trees, flowers to soften and hide the look of the new structure. And so you can see this. And so this case reveals a clash between the local tradition and the global standards. I think it's the most important point of the reconstruction theory in our Chinese context. And then time changes. In 2000s was a time of rapid urbanization in China, and the economic also grew fast. And the reconstruction overserved urban development goals. A good example is the Changmen Gate in Suzhou, from my city. So the original gate was actually dismantled back in 1934 and rebuilt in a Romanesque style for the traffic. But actually, it was dismantled again in 1950s following the founding of the People's Republic to support the national economic development. So you can say that only a little part was left. But in 2001, the local government decided to reconstruct it again. This time was, they think the Changmen Gates should be as a landmark for urban branding. But this new version only copied the historic appearance. But behind the facade, it used modern concrete frames and completely abandoning the traditional structure or material. So this case shows a common pattern. So reconstruction at that time became a tool for city image, making often at the cost of true heritage integrity. So moving to 2010s, two major trends shaped reconstruction at that time: World Heritage status and cultural tourism. Suzhou, for example, aimed to become a World Heritage model city. So in this context, rebuilding lost heritage became not just acceptable, but quite common. So take Keyuan Garden as an example. It's rebuilt near the World Heritage listed Changlangting Pavilion. It was done so well that it even won a UNESCO Asia Pacific Award at that time. So this recognition validated a new approach, high quality, through sometimes speculated reconstruction. And the goal was very clear: to create a more complete historic landscape, boost the city's international image, and leverage cultural tourism. So this is make a clear shift in why and how reconstruction was being done. And then in recent years, the focus of reconstruction has broadened, especially for the post-disaster and the post-war heritage. There were now a much stronger emphasis on community and memory. So take a Fulong Temple in Dujiang, Yan, which was rebuilt after the earthquake. So the goal wasn't just to restore the building quickly, but also to rebuild the community's social life. This case really highlighted the importance of involving the public and all stakeholders. Then this is Hong Bridge from Suzhou. This case is use a different approach. Once a famous landmark, now it remains as preserved ruins within a public park. So instead of rebuilding its physically, digital material now is used to connect the ruins and tell its story and reveal its memory. Offers a new and options, keeping the authentic ruins intact while allowing for virtual reconstruction. So the story of reconstruction continued to unfold, and Changmen Gate is back in this year in 2025 with a new chapter. This time as a part of urban renewal, the approach has evolved significantly. Material, we can see that new material, steel, glasses, and the new structure now openly permitted. So the focus is on recognizability, making sure new elements are visible, distinct, while also designed for cultural tourism. So they use some very modern design. This reflects a real maturation in practice. We are moving away from simple copy the past toward a more honest contemporary expression that still respects history. And interestingly, this new approach aligns much more closely with the spirit of the Venice Charter than the 2001 version did. Yet it's being applied in a way that's distinctly Chinese. So what have we learned from these cases? From the Yellow Korean Town to the latest Changmen Gate project, we see the reconstruction in China is much more than just rebuilding. It's a reflection of changing views on authenticity and a mirror of broad shifts in Chinese society and culture. So this understanding brings both challenges and insights for heritage conservation, especially here in China. So looking ahead, we need to explore how approaches like the historical urban landscape and people-centered approaches can be applied in China. We also need to develop the more integrated strategies for inception, innovation, and managing heritage in our faster changing environment. So thank you for your attention. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone from the Philippines. My name is Timothy. Joining me is Drew, and our presentation is entitled Ship of Theseus, Authenticities and Identities of the Alberto Mansion. Next slide, please. So our paper tackles this peculiar condition of the Alberto Mansion. Effectively, what happens when heritage structures are split in two? Next slide, please. How does its story continue in new locations, and how do we effectively reconcile their split narratives? Next slide, please.
I know, but I don't know how to.
Next slide, please. So our presentation will have 4 parts. Drew will introduce the Alberto mansions, and then we will operationalize their existence through the paradox of the Ship of Theseus in their collective everydays. So without further ado, Drew.
Thank you for that, Tim. So now I will tell you, next slide, please. So now I will tell you how there came to be 2 structures claiming to be the Alberto mansion. Next slide, please. The Alberto Mansion was constructed in 1775, and it occupied a position of prominence at the Plaza Mayor, which, according to the Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias, signifies the starting point of the formation of towns, and where important buildings such as the church and the municipal building can be found. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. There. Okay. So rightfully so, the mansion was home to Don Lorenzo Alonso Alberto, one of the most affluent residents of Biñan during the Spanish period in the Philippines. Here we have a photo of the mansion where within the central plaza of the town, and across it is the town hall, which is, I think this was taken in mid 19,000s. Next slide, please. By the 1800s, the historic significance of the mansion began to take shape. Next slide, please. Don Lorenzo Alberto is the father of Teodora Alonso, who then is the mother of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. Although her stay at the mansion was very brief, as she only spent her childhood there, this is one of the main reasons for the mansion's significance, as it is one of the last remaining extant structures with direct connection to Rizal's life. Aside from this, historians also argue that there is a possibility that Jose Rizal was actually named after Teodora's brother, Jose Alberto Alonso, because of his significant impact on him. In this photo, we see the local government of Biñan displayed portraits of Rizal with his parents inside the rooms of the historic Alberto mansion. Next slide, please. By the late 19th century until the early 21st century, the mansion would then go through several different owners, but would still end up again under the ownership of Don Lorenzo's heir, Jerry Alberto. As it was owned by different people, the mansion will also alter its space and function. Next slide, please. Here is one of the here is a photo of the Alberta mansion in 2010. As you can see, parts of the roof already collapsed due to numerous typhoons that passed through the Philippines yearly. While the second floor remains in disrepair, the ground floor, however, maintains its operation as a commercial establishment. Next slide, please. It was also during this time, where in 2010, where the Alberto mansion was facing its impending sale and demolition. News spread that it was already acquired by Las Casas Filipinas de Acuzar, and it was going to be transplanted to their heritage resort in another province north of the Philippines. The dismantling of the house was discreet, as Las Casas did it from the inside. However, heritage advocates in the Philippines caught on, and they started a campaign to save the Alberto mansion. Now, before we move forward, let me give you a brief overview of what is Las Casas Filipinas de Acuzar. Next slide. So, Las Casas Filipinas de Acuzar is a resort that simulates Hispanic Philippine town experience with translocated heritage houses. It is a brainchild of developer Jerry Acuzar, who is a known collector of antiques and a collector of heritage houses. When it opened in 2010, they had over 41 houses in the resort, and that number may still increase as the resort continues to grow. Next slide. What makes Las Casas notorious, however, is the fact that they have amassed a considerable amount of heritage houses from different parts of the Philippines, and it is all located in one location in the coastal region of Bagac, Bataan. These houses are displayed in a resort setting, which is stylized, sanitized, and commercialized version of Filipino history, which then raises concerns on displacement, authenticity, and commodification. Next slide. Here we have a map showing you how far removed the building is from its original context. So from a community near the Laguna de Bay, it was transferred into the seaside coastal town of Bagac, Bataan. Next slide. As the demolition from by Las Casas was discreet, the interiors of the mansion were already compromised, causing its roof to collapse in 2012. Next slide, please. This then led to more heritage groups calling for the preservation of the mansion and also led to the divergence of two houses as they were simultaneously being built and called to be preserved. Next slide, please. So the local community, heritage groups, and local governments mobilized further to stop further damage of the house. Next slide. By 2013, this is now the transplanted Las Casas structure, and it was named Casa Biñan, which contains the translocated interiors of the Alberto Mansion's second floor, artificially patinated in a simulacra of a Spanish-era Philippine town. Next slide, please. By 2017, the legal battle resulted in the expropriation of the mansion by the local government of Biñan. Next slide, please. And they immediately began rehabilitation. Funnily enough, though, according to the LGU, it was also Las Casas, the developer of Las Casas, who rebuilt the mansion in Biñan as they were the lowest bidder in the project. Next slide, please. By 2019, the historic Alberto Mansion in Biñan, or where it's in its original site, was finished. Next slide. And this is it now. So now until now we have this conundrum of two structures, one in Bagak and one in Biñan.
So yes, this presents a conundrum. Next slide, please. And another next slide, please. So we're familiar with the paradox of the ship of Theseus, this question of identity when you replace parts of a ship. But what happens, next slide please, when the parts that were taken out of the ship were used to build another ship? Next slide please. While this statement is a logical impossibility, at first glance, this is the reality facing the Alberto houses. Next slide, please. So now we arrive at the conceptual anchor for this case study, that of authenticity. Coming from the Greek authentikos, built into this word is the idea that authenticity is not located solely in an object, but in a triadic relationship between the author, the process of doing, and the object itself. But if we view this from a materialist interpretation that's still common in much of heritage practice, we reduce, with physical fabric as the main container of value, we risk reducing heritage to what can be seen and what can be touched, often at the expense of the immaterial. This becomes particularly limiting in the case of the Alberto Mansion, where these traces transcend physical connections across the two structures. Next slide, please. Mimesis therefore offers a way to rethink how authenticity can persist beyond these material fragments. In Platonic thought, mimesis is really representation, the movement from an ideal form, from this world of forms, into its many expressions. Applied to heritage, operationalizing mimesis allows an object's essence to be retained, even when embodied in new forms. Replicas can reference the original while simultaneously generating new meanings tied to their own contexts. Derrida describes this as mimesis' inherent doubleness, always pointing back to something prior while producing something new, dissolving the boundary between original and copy. In some cases, like in the case of the Alberto Mansion, these three expressions can be somehow hyperreal because these structures in the restored state were actually never seen by the public, and for the longest time, the Alberto Mansion itself existed as a private house barred from public view. Next slide, please. So the question of authenticity within the Alberto Mansions are captured by the narrow document and Yamato Declaration. Authenticity, as established, is culturally relative. Importantly, intangible heritage, the idea of memory, perception, experience, it's constantly being recreated, aligning with Derrida's idea of doubling. So this meaning emerges through public interpretation, which frees it from a fixed singular authenticity. This is why reconstructions like Alberto can be meaningful. These replicated forms can be considered authentic by virtue of the message they convey, even if their material fabric is new. Latour and Lowe describe this process as this migration of aura, so to speak. The idea that reproduction or reinterpretation doesn't diminish aura, but redistributes it and amplifies it across objects. Next slide, please. Now we address the idea of the copy itself. If we look at it from the idea of the Riga Charter, authenticity through a structure's ability to, quote, credibly and accurately bear witness to its significance, this often results in replicas being dismissed as inferior or inauthentic. But the Alberto Mansions complicates this assumption. Both the Biñan and Las Casas structures are composite biographies shaped by their own contexts and their entanglement with the past. Through this idea of mimetic practice, they reference the original world of forms of the idea of the Alberto Mansion, while generating their own identities rooted in their respective local contexts. Seen this way, the copies are meaningful as expressions within a broader network of authentic form, capable of bearing witness in their own right. Next slide, please.
Now let's dive deeper into each of the structure. Next slide, please. Now, while the Casa Biñan in Las Casas might contain some original parts of the Alberto Mansion, it stands as a hybrid of real parts, exploring the idea of Ruskin's patina and the essence of the original's fragment in a dioramatic approach to authenticity. The resort used the vehicle of intrigue and feud within the reassembled domestic spaces. The original elements and ornamentation of the mansion has already been replaced by fantastical representations. And the controversy involving Teodora Alonso during the 19th century was sensationalized. It became the main story for the house. The heritage tours in Las Casas deem such narratives as cheesery, a portmanteau of the Filipino word chismis or gossip or hearsay, combined with history, wherein they present a hyperreal experience set within a heritage theme park. The present distortion of the Casa Biñan overrides the historical significance of the building, relegating it to a resort facility. This new environment functions as a restaurant, event venue, museum, movie set piece, and creating new present meanings and significances. However, unfortunately, its value is still tied to another extant structure that it represents. Next slide. On the other hand, the historic Alberto Mansion in Biñan grounds new material and space within the locality imbued with the aura of its surrounding community, albeit with the renewed function as a community museum. Referencing the 18th century structure that once stood in its place, the extant ruins of its exterior were combined with a contemporary interpretation based on both limited archival photographs and paradoxically the hybrid structure of Casa Biñan, including the architectural inventions of its lost areas. Their decision to use the Las Casas structure as the basis for reconstructing the Alberto Mansion in its original location meant that the new historic Alberto Mansion in Biñan is anything but materially authentic. In spite of this, however, Biñan acknowledges the 2019 structure's continuity, maintaining its integrity as a symbol of the town. Next slide, please. Here we see the structure in 2010, where before its transplantation. Next slide, please. Here is now again the Casa Biñan or the reflatted Alberto Mansion in Bagac. Next slide, please. And here is the historic Alberto Mansion in Biñan. Now, in the next few slides, we will be showing you their differences and or similarities. Next, please. On the left image is the historic Alberto Mansion in Biñan, and in the right image is the Casa Biñan. Here, this is the main staircase of the building, and the original materials are already in Casa Biñan or in Bagac in the transplanted location. Meanwhile, the one in situ is already a reimagined staircase based on what was transplanted. Next slide, please. Again, on the left side is the Biñan structure, and on the right side is the bagak structure, and the paintings that you can see on the right side are also originally part of the mansion in its original location in Biñan. And the portraits here depict the story, or the, sorry, not the story, the prominent of its original owner, Don Lorenzo Alberto. Next, please. Here we now see the structure, the second floor of the structure. On the left side, it's the historic Alberto mansion, and on the right side is an old the original, or what it's supposed to look like, as this was the second floor of before it was eventually it turned into ruins. Next, please.
So next slide, please. So today, the identity of the mansion is no longer housed in a single physical building. Instead, it's diffused across 3 layers. The 2 structures we just saw, and also the idea of the Alberto mansion, this conceptual construct that both structures attempt to embody. Shaped by present nostalgia and contemporary civic desire, this palimpsest of stories reference the lost original while simultaneously generating new meanings rooted in its present context. Next slide, please. So we see that both structures generate new narratives through ongoing community engagement, and the intangible aura of the original, these memories, associations, and symbolic resonance, has migrated to both of these structures, enabling access to the past through their present forms. Also, interestingly, the threat of demolition activated public advocacy. It was only because the building was about to be transferred to Las Casas that the locals mobilized to save it and have the structure declared as a historic monument. This formal recognition occurred simultaneously with the reconstruction in Las Casas, placing the 2 structures in a mirrored relationship. As Lending argues, this uncoupling allows the reconstruction's symbolic power within both the theme park and within the Biñan structure, serving as a locus for local identity, pride of place, and lived experience. Together, they form this network of migrating aura and meaning. Next slide, please. Both structures and the process behind their creation and reconstruction have contributed to the re-realization of civic venue for the Alberto Mansion. While debates about material integrity persist, particularly surrounding the transfer of elements to Bagak, the Las Casas reconstruction has nonetheless become part of Biñan's lived and emotional landscape ex situ. Meanwhile, the current structure in Biñan, in the city itself, asserts its authority as the original site of memory. This case demonstrates what Jabaruti calls these complex entanglements of copies and originals. What we see ultimately is a plural, mutually validating system. The Biñan structure and the Las Casas reconstruction together activate a field of layered values, circulating memory and evolving identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this really fascinating case. Well, we will now have time for questions and discussions. I think that 3 of the presentations were really around the same question. So maybe I will unshare your presentation. Well, who would like to comment or ask a question? Luc?
Thank you very much. As to the last presentation, I mean, it's fascinating. I'm more particularly because of the introduction of what to me is a kind of critical issue. That is, on the one hand, the direct experience of history in a real context, which is historical and contemporary, versus the term which has been used, tourist consumption. Because that's, of course, I mean, really a kind of dramatic development. In a certain sense, it's a wrong kind of museification of heritage. And I think that's a difficult issue, but a crucial one. This, as they did explain very explicitly about this consumption. This has nothing to do with what really the role of heritage could be. It has other, let's say, yeah. Well, that's to me it's very interesting. I mean, Mark Lano could tell you about the development of the experience of open air museums in Europe since Skansen, and more particularly the case of the Belgian Open Air Museum, which is a museum, definitely, and which is about not about replicas but about a collection of original buildings, relocation, but in a very well considered way, not just for touristic consumption. The whole problem is that increasingly it's becoming, of course, also an issue of an object of touristic consumption, without really dealing with what do we do with this past, this historical dimension. How do we experience? It's an actual today's consumptive kind of experience instead of really learning from history.
Quite true. We normally, at the beginning, open air museums were meant to conserve the buildings, but not only the buildings. They were also trying to keep the traditions. The old open air museums in Europe started with transferring the buildings and then keep the traditions ongoing in the museum context. So we changed that a little bit in the sense that we tried to use these buildings as expressions of an historical evolutionary tradition, namely how people built and worked in that time, to starting from values that they treasured in their community. And now more and more, these open air museums become frameworks where all kind of leisure productions are being performed and presented, which is quite opposite to the initial purpose of a museum, where the resources are there to explain the backgrounds and make them into foregrounds in information transfer. You're quite right.
My question to the speaker concerns the heirs, the people who inherited the house. And was that taken by eminent domain? I mean, were they compensated in any way? Because it certainly concerns the people who owned it originally.
So when the building was still owned by the heir, Jerry Alberto, he then sold it to the owner of the Heritage Resort. So at that time, when the government acquired the building through an expropriation case, the compensation was to Las Casas and Jerry Alberto. So that was the it was actually contested even at that time, since Jerry Alberto already did not want anything to do with the mansion because it was for him already hard to maintain in its own right. So it was only the after the acquisition of the government, the just compensation was then given to the at the time owner, who was already the resort, or Jerry Acuzar.
Other questions in the room or online? Does someone have a question? Otherwise, I would myself have a question for Tamás. Are you still there? We don't see you anymore, but I suppose you're still hearing us. Okay. No, I found that was very interesting, because you emphasized that the fact that heritage has been growing over time, and so we have passed from monuments to heritage, and then you say that we should keep working on monuments and sites with different principles than for heritage in general. So I find this very interesting, but where is the limit, in fact? How do we decide what are the monuments and sites within heritage? Because, for example, if we take the Belgian example, what is listed as heritage in Belgium does not exactly correspond to all I would consider monuments and sites in Belgium. I think there are many things which are not listed, for example, in modern heritage and so on. So where is the limit between what you would call monuments and sites and what would be heritage?
Thank you. And I do believe this is a very valid question. And there is no very sharp limit among those sets of the heritage items. However, the historic monuments and sites, let's using this expression, going back to the original name of the ICOMOS, are always selected and recognized on the scientific level and got let's say legal protection. But it doesn't mean that it's something which phrased the how to say the circle of historic monuments and sites just also growing. And you can recall that in the very beginning in the 19th century, it was only some fortifications and churches and so on. And today we also do have protected areas and so on. The question is not about the property and not about the how to say the real value. It's really the differentiation among the approach. We have to protect it as it is because it's something very special or not. And look, you can recall one of my pictures with an armchair. When I am showing the heritage of mine. This armchair is to me it's a heritage because it is a very much important for my family. It was used by my father and so on, but it's nothing to do with others. But if this armchair goes back, goes into the museum or something like this, it could be recognized as something nationally important, something. But go back to the historic monuments, and I want to be very short. So I do believe the most important thing when you are dealing with historic monuments, sorry for my colleagues from Philippines, it's not allowed to call it, which is something, a very good replica or something which is recognizing things. It is, of course, it is important. It has a very strong national identity and memorial meaning, but it has nothing to do with historic monument. So just to finish, conclude, the most important thing about the recognizing the value and the selection is not just a majority vote, it is something very scientific.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? But for me, I don't really have a question, but I have a remark about what both your presentations, because I found it so fascinating to see how, well, what is really interesting from my point of view, of course, is the impact of these documents and of Western vision of heritage on how concretely the projects were carried on in China. So I find it so interesting to see how a very, let's say, long and traditional thinking was really not erased, but replaced in some ways by like completely out of context operations. I think that this postmodern reconstruction of this building was just, it's incredible, really. I can't believe it has been ever done. So it's really very interesting. And I think that reconstruction would indeed be still a great theme to discuss in the committee.
Hello?
Yes, Franca has a question.
Yes, is about the two China
One more sentence.
presentation.
Did you want to add something,
No.
Tamás? Okay.
Yes,
so
really,
we have a
one
yes?
very short sentence. When we touched upon the point of question of reconstruction, I do believe it's something we have to be deal with a much more detailed manner, because reconstruction became a kind of how to say, very important and very timely problem, and I do believe that's important to use it region by region. Thank you.
Thank you. Franca, you had a question for
Yes.
Chinese?
Yes.
Yeah.
The first presentation, thank you very much for all the historic parallel between Europe and China. And I was asking if you have something like the 19th century in Europe with the relation with history completely changing, and the new Gothic, new Roman, this kind of things that are so linked to the idea of monument. The two things are the history of architecture, the historic recuperation and restoration are all linked. Do you have something like this? Yes. And for the second, what I was thinking about was how many destruction, how many demolition you have in front of this project of reconstruction. So what I'm thinking about is old centers destroyed, old landscape destroyed very quickly, and something reconstruct to, I don't know, give something old. So that is the impression I have. So I think we have to see the two on the same global vision. Thank you.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. So the answer to the first question is yes, and because we only have 15 minutes, so I didn't have the time to elaborate, but it was actually in my general reasoning of the paper. So in the 1930s, that was the first architectural heritization that happened in China, and that was exactly carried out by Professor Liang Chen and his wife Lin Huiyin, who were trained in the U.S. And that was exactly what you said. It's really the starting point of the Chinese historiography, the history writing about the evolution of forms, evolution of styles, and that was really the moment when, like in the 19th century Europe, lots of discussions happened, and yeah, people started to see the styles, see the nuances between different forms in the past and try to catalog them. So this is the beginning of the writing of history. And also accompanying this, also Professor Liang Chen and also many of his colleagues, and they started a grand debate it's about, like the question of what is China? That was a time when a lot of Western ideas was actually imposed on China, I have to say, in a kind of colonial way, and that forced that generations of elites, young scholars, to think about who are they and who we are. So that's really the identity building. That's also the period of time, the invention of Chinese architecture by the Chinese themselves, because before the Europeans came, we say architecture. We don't say, it's like Yokaleto's book is called A History of Conservation, not the history of European conservation. So before the Europeans came, we call it architecture. And then after the Europeans came, we were forced to think of a concept of Chinese architecture. So we are different. So all of this actually started from there. And Liang Chen started this kind of so-called new classical idea of how to make concrete new buildings also looking Chinese. So that all started from that period of time. And a little bit comments also on the second question, but before I give the mic to you. So yes, that was also something that I somehow canceled because of the the limit of time. What is also behind this reconstruction or the need to see nostalgia is a huge collective sense of victimization. And the sense of victimization came from the Cultural Revolution. Of course, this extreme political ideology backed intentional vandalism against the traditional heritage that actually left marks even that are visible today in China in the urban built landscape. And the second one is the from the late 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. This is the boom of economy figured by real estate developing. A lot of things were gentrified. Historical quarters like Beijing, Suzhou were really removed systemically. So this is also, again, a huge loss of national identity, cultural identity, and that forced the people to rethink about, again, like the 1930s scholars, who we are. what is Chinese. So then both of this collective sense of victimization is also behind this the need to see heritage.
Thank you, Jinze. So for me, also I have a very interesting thinking about how to define the reconstruction and the restoration. For the last project, we can also say that it's actually like a restoration, not a reconstruction. So actually in China, restoration is permitted in our government's law, the conservation law, but the reconstruction at that time is not permitted. So at sometimes, even it just leaves some columns just as a ruins, but the client maybe say it's a restoration rather than a reconstruction. So it's quite interesting. Thank you.
I have to just a small remark because we were part of the competition in Xi'an, and the gate was in our plan, but not the postmodernist reconstruction, not that, but the reconstruction, it had a reason. The reason was to keep the remains under. It's a shelter, and the shape is because you want to connect the people to what it was. And if we just do a modern building on top of it, nobody will understand, okay, this is the entrance to the palace. This is the king's way. This is the main entrance. So, and that was, but it was all done with modern material. It's cladded. It's not a real reconstruction. And the other buildings that weren't built were supposed to be museums with function and not just, you know, sculptures in the open, yeah, as ruins or stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for coffee break. We have now fresh coffee. So I propose we take like until 20 minutes, until 11:15, because we have one presentation less in the next session, so we won't be too late.